did manage to get a little bit of gliding in, though, with the wonderful Mr. Sato in Japan. And with the Barons in America, it sounded like you had made some good friends in the gliding world.
Yeah, there were some gliding events, Nick. The gliding in Japan was very interesting. I was introduced to him through the chief designer that I mentioned before. He knew him well. And Akira Sato was a lovely, lovely, lovely man. Spoke very little English, but we managed. And I would request the freighter pattern up through Taipei to arrive in Tokyo Narita as the curfew was finishing and the first arrivals coming in. Been up all night, go and have a shower, get changed, take a train into Tokyo. There was Mr. Sato on the platform waiting for me, and he would drive me out to Sekiado, which was the principal gliding airfield, and had some gliding. There was one very funny but not funny incident on one of the visits, because we're driving out to Sekiado, and Mr. Sato, in his broken English, is trying to get something across to me. And he's sort of saying, Mr. Lee, this time when we come back, we have party. Oh, right. Anyway, we drive back into central Tokyo. He parks the car at his place of work. We take a lift upstairs. Now I'm getting very nervous. We get out of the lift, down this corridor, and he opens the doors into this big room, and I nearly dropped. All around this room, there were a lot of people in lounge suits with their good lady wives, a big table in the middle, groaning with food and drink. And one by one, they all bowed and introduced themselves and went right round the room. And then Mr. Sato says, "Okay, Mr. Lee, you make a speech." I'm in my scruffy gliding gear, and I mean scruffy gliding gear. I felt awful. Anyway, George made speech, and we had a good evening. So that was funny. The Baron Hilton was a pinch me, this can't be real experience. As a world champion, I was invited on this experience, first of all to Las Vegas, where I was put up in, of course, a Hilton hotel, treated like royalty, limo pickup, taken to show in the evening, the best seat in the house, of course. All amazing experiences. Finally drove out to the airport, little red carpet up to this, this airplane, and flown out to his private ranch called the Flying M Ranch. Baron Hilton, very generous man, very hospitable, aviation, very big aviation enthusiast. And the day would start, one would have a choice of activities, whether you want to go and do some fly fishing on his trout stream, or go, take a hot air balloon ride, or perhaps go up for an aerobatics ride in an aerobatics machine, while everybody, the workers, would be getting the gliders ready. And then when the time was right, we were transported over the other side of the airfield, all the seating outside this huge RV, and lunch was served. And after that, we then finally went to the gliders and got in and did some flying. It was extraordinary experience, absolutely extraordinary. But gee, somebody had to do it. It was a great pleasure, and totally unrepresentative of normal gliding, but a very special, wonderful experience. Yeah.
Absolutely. Now, you were persuaded, I think, against your better judgment, to go to Australia for the 1987 World Championships. And whilst your heart may not have been entirely in it, you still placed in the top 10. But more importantly, for me, Australia seems to have been worming its way into your heart.
Well, as I said, Nick, I knew Australia fairly well. The World Championships did not go at all well for me. The weather was difficult, not strong regular weather, far from. But beyond that, for the first time in all my gliding, I actually had crew personality problems, which was totally unexpected, came from left field. My regular crew chief had never met this Aussie guy, who I knew quite well, but there was a big generation gap, and my regular crew chief was the chief. He was the boss on the ground. And anyway, it never really totally got resolved, and that didn't help either, frankly. But I'm not making excuses. I wasn't up to the mark, and I knew it. I got a couple of daily seconds, but overall, no. But Australia, it more and more, yes, I guess it was drawing. There were just so many positives about it. The thought with due respect to you and everybody over there, the thought going back to Northern European weather didn't draw greatly. And we'd lost touch with the UK, and Maren didn't want to go back to Norway. And so Australia, yeah. And then it was a matter of where are we going to set everything up, because I had this pipe dream of what I wanted to do in retirement, at least for the first 10 years. And that was giving experienced junior glider pilots, and I'm talking about experienced, free advanced coaching in my self-launch high-performance two-seater, because that's the airplane I wanted. And that gave them challenges. Certainly many had never seen it, and it was a challenging aircraft to fly. So the whole concept, I got two 800-meter by 4-meter wide bitumen strips laid down, got a hangar put up, and the whole thing worked exactly as planned, which was a wonderful feeling and very rewarding. And not that I can claim much on his achievement, but one of my students went on from training with me to actually win a World Championships in the club class down in South Australia. So that was very pleasing for me, obviously, to see him accomplish that. And the flying was very rewarding to see people's performance improve. Yeah, you've been an instructor, Nick. You know how rewarding that sort of thing is.
Absolutely. Now, your property near Dalby in Queensland, it seemed to be the perfect choice to set up your gliding school, and you gave it the perfect name, Plain Soaring. It seemed to be that this was the pinnacle of your gliding time, really, from a satisfaction point of view, a kind of dream come true. But you had your problems. I mean, there seemed to be a lot of floods. Your belongings took a long time to get there. That's pretty normal. There were snakes. You weren't feeling very well. Must have been quite an achievement to set that place up.
Challenging in the extreme initially, Nick. I was not at all well physically, and all I could see was monstrous problems and no way over or around them, frankly. And it was hot. We arrived in summer, stinking hot. And one day, the guy who had been leasing the whole property while we were in Hong Kong, I remember meeting him one day and just having a cry on his shoulder. And he just reminded me, and he said, well, look, think about it. He said, it's not every day, that somebody retires, because that alone, it can be a stressful thing, migrates to essentially a new country, gets a new house built, and has an airfield constructed, etc., etc. And I said, thank you, Paul. I feel a lot better now. You're absolutely right.
But there was one little gem in your time, particularly in your early time there in Australia. You had one gliding goal yet to achieve, and that, I believe, was the 1,000-kilometer task, and you managed that in Australia. Can you describe that flight to us?
Yes, that was an amazing experience. To fly a 1,000-kilometer flight using purely thermals is a very big achievement, even today, never mind back then. And there were two other pilots there at the time in an airfield called Waikerie in South Australia. And they were going to try for their 1,000 as well on the same day. So the manager of the airfield, dead now, sadly, Maury Bradney, very experienced man, he had the three gliders out on the runway very early indeed, had the takeoff sequence. The other two pilots were happy to do what we call in gliding a yo-yo task, that is multi-leg sort of back and forth type task. But that wasn't for me. I wanted the proper big FAI triangle, nothing less would do. So I was going to be on my own from the very beginning to the very end. And I remember just getting towed up to 1,000 meters, not feeling a ripple on the tow up. I thought, oh. 1,000 meters, that's the altitude for start, 80 knots, pull the bung, immediately, don't mess around, point down the first leg, best glide angle speed, and off we go. So 2,500 feet, nothing. 2,000 feet, nothing. 1,500 feet, nothing. So I'm looking at the paddocks, as we call them down here, very closely. And then about 1,200, 1,100 feet, I get the first burbles and murmurings of an early thermal. get into it, it develops. I say, oh, Murray, you're a genius. having said less flattering remarks prior. So climb up and then on we go. It wasn't an outstanding, I'm not just being whatever here, false modesty, whatever, but it wasn't an outstanding day. Australian standards, no way. And then I'm going along, and the second turning point was a place called Hay in New South Wales. Now, this is a long way away from Wakery, and I'm suddenly thinking, I remember a question I forgot to ask Maury. That is, what's the latest time I should consider turning Hay or pulling the pin before I get there, sort of thing. And I hadn't, and I did some quick mental sums. It was about 400 plus kilometers from Hay back to Wakery. I thought, oh, as long as I turn by 5:15, I should be right. And I turned just before that, and off we went. Now I had the advantage of a slight quartering tailwind, so that was beneficial. But the thermals were blue, which makes it harder. You don't have the cumulus to mark the lift, so that therefore your progress is slower. Anyway, I'm going along, and finally I get in contact with these other guys on the yo-yo task, and they said, where are you? And I told them, and they said, oh, you should have a good chance of making it home. And got my last thermal, knew I had it in the bag. In fact, I put lots of extra fat safety on the altitude, glid home, landed, and just collapsed in that cockpit. I was utterly exhausted. And the wife of one of the other two pilots ran over to meet me with the most wonderful beer. And I just sat there and drank the beer. And eventually we got back to the clubhouse. Maury looked at the barograph, camera, films, everything. He said, it's good, you got it. So, and that was a UK record at that time. So speeds have changed enormously. Back then I did about 110 kilometers an hour for the task. But performances have improved so much these days. Yeah. Quite different speeds.
That's a lovely story. Now, you ran your last course at Plain Soaring in 2011. What have you been doing since?